Hello, and welcome to Look Both Ways with David and Wes, pragmatic conversations about all things transportation. I am David Zipper, and we are recording via live stream. You can always find our episodes wherever you find your podcasts. And I am joined by
Wes Marshall.
And we are back at our respective homes. I'm back in DC, and you look like you are. I'm seeing traffic outside your
Yeah,
office.
I don't live at work, but
It feels like you do.
It feels like I do sometimes.
Sometimes, it's all good. We have a lot to talk about, including spiking gas prices as we do this recording on March 17th, raising all kinds of questions about the future of transportation. And we're going to get to that. But first, I thought it'd be fun to have a little question, a little bit of fun before we go any further.
What do you got?
Are you ready? So, Wes, I'm just wondering, what was we talk about traffic safety all the time. Like one of us wrote a book about that, and it's not me. But here's a question. What was your scariest experience inside a car?
Inside a car?
Yeah.
Because it's funny, in my safety class, like that is one of the get to know you questions I ask the students, like what was your most harrowing experience in the transportation system? And a couple of years ago, like the Sunday before the Monday class, like I had like my first and only bike crash. So I was bloody on my whole left side, like showing up at that first class. So I talked about that. But in a car,
we talk about like windshield bias all the time. So let's show some empathy to the 90+% of Americans that get around by car.
I've only had one crash in my life, but I was 16 and it wasn't my fault, and that wasn't that big a deal. I think it was, like I remember, like in the early 2000s, a friend of mine from college lived near me at the time in Connecticut, and we were going to go like skiing and snowboarding up in like Vermont, and the weather was really, really dicey. Mm-hmm. And that trip, we made it and we got there, but yeah, that drive was harrowing to say the least. How about yourself?
Hold on. I feel like you grew up outside of Boston. Don't you know how to drive in the winter?
No, but it was just worse than normal. Like, yes, I do know how to drive in the winter. We do it all the time. I live in Colorado now, so for the most part, like that.
No, I mean, I grew up in North Carolina where, like, my parents are New Yorkers. My dad would usually drive us, and he knows exactly how to drive in the snow. But in North Carolina, we get like a smattering of snow every now and then, and nobody has any clue. And he would just be cursing out the drivers left and right on the road.
Do you not know how to drive in the snow?
I mean, I think a bit. Like, I know you want to like brake gently and not be, doing things that are sudden, so forth and so on. Just try to maintain. Am I wrong? Like, you're smirking at me.
No, that's right. I mean,
thank you. I mean, I think I would not want to be in a car with me in a snowstorm. Let's be clear. I don't recommend that unless you have no choice. But I mean, I think I conceptually know. But in North Carolina, people are like from the South their whole lives. It was an adventure. But no, my actually scariest experience was actually near where you are. It was 25 years ago when I drove across the country in my early 20s. And do you know Vail Pass? You must. On I-70. Yep. So imagine this, dude. I'm in Denver going toward Aspen, I think that would be right? Do I have that right? Yep. And steep downhill, incredibly steep, long downhill. And I'm in some kind of like a Mercury with my partner at the time, and the brakes went out.
All right.
Like, brakes are not working. So we have to lift the emergency brake. It's smoking and smelling. It was scary as hell. I'm not going to lie.
I did have one experience where my brakes did go out, and that was when I was a PhD student in Connecticut, so at University of Connecticut. I was driving my Jeep Wrangler, and all of a sudden I had no brakes, but there was nobody around, and I actually was able to use the emergency brake and pull directly into a car repair shop, so I got it fixed right there.
Oh, it's amazing. No, we like had to replace the transmission. The car was shot. It was totally
I had to avoid one car in front of me was slowing down, so I sort of went to the kind of shoulder and pulled the emergency brake. So it was super harrowing for like a split second until I realized I have a emergency brake.
Yeah, emergency brakes are your friend.
Yeah.
But yeah, I definitely recommend anyone who's on Vail Pass, just go easy on your brakes. I think we didn't know how to brake or drive. We just come from Rocky Mountain National Park, and I think you can really wear out your brakes if you're braking too much or like when you're going downhill really quickly. I don't really know exactly how all this works, but some user error may have been involved, to be candid.
I've heard there was something with altitude too, like something happens with the brake fluid. I don't know the details of that, but yeah, I was up on the Loveland Pass on Friday, like going through that, and we haven't had much of a winter, so it wasn't as bad as it usually is, but you're still going down these steep hills with very tight corners. So no brakes. Like, I can see why that is definitely your most.
I really thought there was a 50-50 chance I was going to die. There's nothing we could do except like put on hazards and hope the emergency, because it kept rolling with the emergency brake on. It was crazy. Anyway,
you don't come to a stop. Emergency brake does not just stop you; it slows you down.
I found that out the hard way.
Yeah.
All right. Now that we've like traumatized ourselves by reliving these experiences, let's go on to Word on the Street. This is the part of the podcast where we talk about a transportation issue in the news, and I think it's pretty obvious that the big story in transportation at the moment is the spike in gasoline prices as the Strait of Hormuz in Iran has been all but shut down due to the war that the U.S. and Israel have launched. And I was just checking, as of today, it looks like the average cost of gasoline is up in the last couple of weeks by about 75 cents a gallon in the U.S., which is about 25%. And there is a lot of consternation about this, a lot of discussion, talks of releasing strategic oil reserves, so forth and so on. But Wes, you and I have a lot of thoughts about this. I'll let you go first.
I mean, this is definitely word on the street. I mean, it even was the cold open on Saturday Night Live the other night, was people complaining about gas prices. So I don't know, like it's funny because for me, like, because I bike to work, I don't drive very much, I hardly notice the difference. Like, yes, I filled up my car after going up to the mountains on Friday, but like I do that like once every 45 days or something. So it's just really a minor inconvenience, but most people live in places where that's not the case, where driving is like part of their life day in and day out, and they have to do it to survive. So it makes a much bigger difference for those folks. And, from the transportation hat that I might wear, like there are some good stuff that comes with higher gas prices, right?
Like?
Well, I mean, people are going to drive less. People are going to make different choices than they might normally make. They might combine trips. There might be mode substitution. They might shift to transit, biking, carpooling. I mean, overnight it makes transit more competitive. It makes the walking, biking more attractive. And people might, if they do have to drive, EVs and more fuel efficient vehicles are more appealing. But there's also long-term effects too.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. I guess, it's funny. You and I are both, to varying degrees, a little bit active on like Blue Sky, which is full of urbanists who are, there's a little bit of smugness, shall we say, people being like, oh, well, you know how much more my commute is? 0, because I bike, you bastards. Ha ha ha. Like, yeah, I'm not sure. Again, like that's great if you can do it. Congrats to you, Wes, and others who can. But the majority of Americans, this is actually pretty painful, I would say. And also, it's painful not just with your commute, but in ways they're not as obvious. The higher cost of gasoline is going to drive up the cost of transporting goods that we all need, like groceries, obviously. Airline tickets are going to get more expensive. So I don't think anybody should be dancing in the street over this, shall we say. But you're right. Like, I think it's really interesting to look back at the last time we had a real oil shock and what happened to transportation policy. That was in the 1970s when OPEC basically dramatically reduced the amount of oil that was available, not just in the U.S., but to worldwide markets. You've looked at this, right? Have you written about it, or I'm sure you're aware of what?
Yeah, I'm aware. I mean, one of the things is that we did start that strategic petroleum reserve. I mean, you just mentioned that earlier today, and that's one of the things, the CAFE standards.
Yep, cafe is a huge one. Some of the steps we took in the U.S. to try to conserve gasoline were good. I think, like cafe, like a shift towards smaller cars that we then abandoned. But remember, like the Chevette was sort of born out of that.
Well, just pause for a second. I think maybe we should just explain what the cafe standards are, just in case people don't know too.
Yeah, that's a good call. The corporate average fuel economy standards, which was created by Congress in the 70s to basically set a minimum fuel economy across corporate fleets. That's important because you could have some gas guzzlers that you're still offering if you're GM or whoever, as long as it is balanced out by a lot of other cars you're producing and selling that are going to have much lower or much better gas mileage, I should say.
Yeah, and over the next decade, I mean, miles per gallon in the American cars, I mean, the efficiency went way, way up. I mean, and car sizes generally went down.
That's right. There's some original sins in how cafe was set up that I've written about before, and that it created what's called the light truck loophole, so that an SUV or pickup truck, of which we had very few of then, they could basically have worse gas mileage because they were treated as work vehicles as opposed to sedans or station wagons. But of course, most people today and for the last 30 years have treated SUVs and pickups as substitutes for sedans and station wagons. But yeah, cafe was born out of the oil crisis, as were lower speed limits, as was something really stupid, I think you would agree, which was eliminating right on red.
Yes.
Or allowing red on red, excuse me, allowing red, I should say. That was ostensibly a policy to allow vehicles to use less gasoline because you can maintain momentum as you're making a turn. But funny enough, when the gas crisis ended in the late 70s or early 80s, like the speed limits went back up, right? But right on red was never reversed. The U.S. is still one of the very few countries in the world, maybe even the only one, you might know more than I do about this, where we allow right on red, which is really a legacy, a bad one, I think, of the oil crisis.
And on the safety side, I mean, there's some great paper. I mean, you did mention it, the 55 mile an hour. I think it wasn't until 87 until we allowed 65, but it wasn't until 95 when we finally went back to getting rid of the 55. So there's some great studies out there, just how many lives were saved over that time because of the 55 mile an hour speed limit. And I mean, I think I wrote about this in my book. There's one of them that says like it was probably 40,000 lives saved over that time because of this. But on the other side, the right turn on red, like there's one great paper that goes through the increase in crashes, the increase in pedestrian crashes, the increase in lives lost for older people, for children, and like they are really high numbers. I think crashes overall went up like 20%. Pedestrian went up like 50-something%, and like for older people it was like 100%, and for kids it was much higher, and especially in urban areas, like that's where they found the biggest difference. So, like those are two counteracting safety things that we ended up on the worst side of both of those.
Yeah, no, I think that it's unfortunate, but it's true. So I guess that's the 70s when you look at like the safety legacy, which is not ideal. But I think, to your earlier point, which is that higher gasoline costs by definition make every other mode more competitive. I think it's true. We'll see how long the higher prices remain, because people need time, I think, to adjust. Like not everybody can just suddenly hop on their e-bike and save money that way. You need time to go buy an e-bike. And the longer this goes on or seems to be going on, the more likely I think you'll see that kind of behavior change is my expectation. But I'll tell you something else that I've been thinking about in the wake of the gas price sort of jump. Did you see that Mark Kelly, a Democrat senator from Arizona, is saying that we should have a 4-month pause in the federal gas tax?
I did not see that.
Yeah, it's like, oh my God. It's just like, what is the point of the Democratic Party when we have ideas like this? So for those who that's like exactly the wrong direction for lots of reasons, like politically it helps Trump. You could easily argue to get out of the ramifications of a war he started. But beyond that, we shouldn't. Democrats are the ones who are supposed to care about climate change and care about mode shift away from cars and a adoption of electric vehicles. This is a step in the wrong direction. And it also just, to me, really brings home the exasperating nature of our treatment of the gas tax as a country. Do you know when we last raised the gas tax, the federal level?
I was in high school, and that was not yesterday.
No, in fact, it was 1993. And when Bill Clinton had just come into office. I think it's 18.4 cents a gallon. Do I have that right? Does that sound right? That's the last time. So, like, think of what inflation has been like in the last 30 some years.
Because there are other countries that have tied their gasoline taxes to inflation, where I know in Australia, at least, quarterly they will rise or lower the gas price depending on what inflation did. And we don't do that either.
No, we don't do it. And when the gas prices are low, we don't take advantage of that to increase the federal tax, which would also make sense. So it's just like, but now, of course, because we have a crisis due to this war with Iran, now we're talking about freezing or pausing the gas tax, which is just such a frustrating, backwards way of thinking about transportation policy, I would say.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people are sort of questioning, because if you look at the data, we're currently an oil exporter. So I think people wonder why our gas prices are even increasing, but that's not that simple either. Like it's a worldwide global market, and
correct.
Even in our gas, I guess apparently the oil that we export is different than the oil we usually turn into gas. So there's different qualities of gasoline too. So it's just not that simple, but it is a real impact on American families. I mean, that is one of the things that the current administration is focused on. And it does affect affordability. It does affect, day-to-day lives. So
and people notice it, right? You're going to notice the price of gas. Most people do, I think, every week when they're filling up their car. Kind of like why people freak out about the price of eggs and groceries, because you're buying them so often. You notice when the price changes. So, I mean, politically, this is not a winning one for Trump, I would have to think.
Yeah, and for a lot of people, you don't have any other choice but to fill up. Like there are, if eggs triple in price, you could not have eggs for the week and just eat something different, and you're probably going to be okay. But with gas, for most people, like it is what it is. Like you just have to pay it, and it feels, I can imagine how much it sort of hurts when you have a big SUV that has a big old tank. And I know you said we only went up 70 something cents in the last couple of weeks, but I mean last fall it was about half the price it is now. Like it's been a much bigger jump over a relatively short time span.
That's right. That's definitely right. But I think it's also worth keeping in mind the fact is, like, we in the US pay a price for gasoline that is dramatically lower than other countries. And maybe that's actually a good segue into the next topic, which we'll get to in a second. But I was just looking this up, and in Europe, which is also seeing gas prices rise, I think they're obviously selling gasoline by the liter, but it's well over $8 a gallon in many countries, from what I could see. To put in perspective what we're paying in America.
Whenever I'm over there, like you see it like in like euros per liter, and you're like, wait, what does that translate to? Because you have to do 2 multiplications, and you're like, oh, holy crap, that's a lot of money for gas.
Yeah, I know. I've written articles about these topics, and I'm like, fiddling with Excel, trying to normalize everything. It's really annoying, but ultimately, it's like twice as much in other rich countries. So, and that has actually like long-term implications. We talked about cafe being a tailwind for the shift toward carb load. I would definitely argue that the systematically low prices for gasoline has also contributed toward larger cars, which get worse gas mileage. It takes more energy to propel them. And when it doesn't cost as much as it would in other countries to fill up a tank of a Hummer, the Hummer is going to be a little more competitive, right?
Yeah, and it also makes it okay to live out on the outskirts of wherever you live, where you're focused on, it doesn't make a big deal in your life if you're driving 30 miles somewhere, because we focus so much more on mobility and speed than we do on access and proximity. And when gas prices are low, there's no like really sort of negative consequence of that. So I don't know, like you would think that too, bigger picture, like gas prices, this isn't even a gas tax issue. This is more gas prices in general. Higher ones would shift us more towards a system focused more on access and proximity and better safety.
That's right.
All those things can go hand in hand.
That's right. And better safety simply well, now we really are leading right into the next topic I think we want to talk about, because I was going to say, if people aren't driving as far because they don't want to, they can't afford the gasoline, that's going to lead to less exposure for a crash, right? Which is very relevant for, maybe we just go straight to the next topic because we clearly want to go there. As we pivot toward Roundabout, which is the part of the podcast where Wes and I always pick a topic we think is worthy of discussion. And this is one that both Wes and I have spent some time thinking about and getting peeved about, which is the right and wrong way to think about crash deaths and the metric we should use. So without saying anything further, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, no, this is something that, 20 years ago, like when I was working on my dissertation, like this just drove me crazy. I'm like, this really doesn't make any sense the way we measure safety. And taking a step back, the way we measure, safety for like a country would be road fatalities per like mile driven, or in the US would be like per 100 million miles driven. In other places it might be kilometers. But the idea is that we want to have an exposure metric to make our metric more apples to apples. And the one that we use here, the denominator of that is miles driven. The numerator, I know we don't do much math in this show, but the numerator is going to be fatalities. So when I was looking at that and trying to...
Sorry, just to be clear, you're saying we should be clear about, that's the standard in the US is deaths per 100 million miles. Is that right?
No, this was actually codified by when the US DOT was founded, like in 1966 or whatever it was. They codified this into law. Like this is the way we have to measure safety. And this is often the way engineers like to compare us to other countries in terms of safety, because we sort of look good. And if you go to any road safety conference, an engineer will always doing a safety presentation. We'll show a graph that shows our road fatality rate through the years, and it looks like we've just gotten better and better over the last 100 years of the United States. And they're like, "Oh, we did it! Like we've added so much safety to the system. Like, you're welcome."
Because deaths per mile driven have been falling. That's what you...
Yeah, but when you sort of think about it, like even for a split second, it's like, wait, how does this work? So if we drive more, we seem safer? And literally, there's two ways to improve safety. One is to reduce fatalities. Great. The other way is to drive more. So this is something that always just drove me crazy. So when it came time to write my book, I was very curious as to why we do it this way. So that was one of the rabbit holes I dove down, and, led me back like to the early 1930s. And like before, like in the 1920s, the way the automotive industry measures safety was like fatalities per car. So
yep.
Things were looking good because they were selling more and more cars. Fatalities were kind of holding steady for a little bit there. So it looked like safety was improving. But then the Great Depression hit and they weren't selling many cars, but fatalities kept going up. So they started looking less and less safe. So for a little bit in the early 1930s, they started measuring it fatalities per gallon of gas used or something to that effect. And that helped them for the short term, but they realized that as cars got more efficient, that also would make them look bad. So, there's this guy, Paul Hoffman, like he was previously the CEO of Studebaker. Before that, he was like their best regional salesperson. Like in the mid 1930s, he wrote this article for the Saturday Evening Post. And the magic of what he did was he didn't present this as a new metric. He presented it as the way we've always measured safety. Like we've always measured safety. And like he made the right point. As deaths per mile. That he made the right point that we need to have an exposure metric, but he just picked one that he liked best that would make cars look safe for the time being and the foreseeable future. A few years later, he wrote a book that I cite a lot in my book, Seven Roads to Safety, where he, furthered this and kind of compared us to like how many trips around the earth we could do before a fatality would give in this metric. And it seems so impressive. But I don't know, I mean, you talked about this in the article you wrote recently, like sort of when you can dig into, some hypotheticals and counterfactuals, it doesn't add up.
No, that's right. And yeah, there's a lot here. Because I think you and I would agree, Wes, we can talk about that the appropriate metric for thinking about deaths or traffic safety is deaths per capita, not deaths per mile or deaths per kilometer, deaths per capita.
Yeah. If you think about road safety as a health impact, which is hard to argue it's not,
right,
that makes much more sense.
That's right. And, I think that I wrote an article last week in Bloomberg City Lab sort of explaining why this deaths per mile metric is bad. And so is deaths per kilometer. Deaths per capita is the right way to look at it. And there's a lot of ways of explaining why this makes sense. I'm sure, Wes, you have your favorite examples because I bet you talk about this in your classes often. I know you mentioned it in your book. But, there's a line that I think actually is pretty good that pops up in sort of urbanist discourse sometimes, saying that measuring deaths per mile driven is like measuring deaths per cigarette smoked. And that's sort of a little incendiary or provocative, but it kind of gets the idea across that it's not like it's a bad thing to try to make smoking a cigarette be less likely to kill you. There's ways of doing that, like better detection, better treatment, maybe less carcinogenic, cigarette design. Those are all like versions of medicine, I would say. But if you're thinking about tobacco-induced cancer from a public health perspective, obviously, we simply want people to smoke less, right? That's intuitive. And if we think about road safety in the same way, then it's not just about making each mile driven safer, which admittedly is important. Like that, you can do that by having better road designs and having safer cars, so forth and so on. But it's just having less driving, period. Less exposure.
Yeah, the metric is useful if we're looking at like the safety of a particular piece of street. We want to know how many cars are coming through and how, like stuff like that. Like there's like per mile or something metric that might be useful, but it's not useful when we think about overall safety, overall health of the population. And those cigarette examples are good. Like when I really am trying to make a point of how this affects like how we build places and things like that. One example I give, like where I live now, my dentist. Actually, my eye doctor is about a mile from me. Where I lived in Connecticut, my eye doctor was like 6 miles from me. And the way I show it is that if I died during each of those trips, like my trip in Connecticut is still like a lot safer than my trip is here in Denver, even though I died on both trips. In fact, if I had died twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, I'd have to get to the 6th time where all of a sudden I've died 6 times, and now that trip is less safe, even though comparing it to the one where I died once. And when you sort of see it like that, it's like, we're building our places on this mentality that more driving equates to more safety, and that's not what we want.
No, I think that's right. And it also, if we focus on deaths per mile driven, we really lose sight of some of the most important reasons, not the only reasons, but some of the most important reasons that the US is such a horrible outlier in road safety. When you look at the per capita death rates, we're like literally 3 or 4 times higher than peer countries. And that's something I talked about in the story that I wrote. It's because of sprawl. It's because of lackluster transit and train service. It's because of all the steps that we've taken with our policy and our land use to basically force Americans to drive a lot, whether they want to or not. And every mile driven, even if it's done relatively safely, is going to carry some risk of a crash. If you don't acknowledge that as a risk factor, we're never actually going to fix some of the fundamental problems that we have in this country around road safety.
And I will have a couple papers hopefully coming out this year that gets into this sort of land use and exposure as a road safety, because nobody really thinks of land use as a road safety intervention, but it should be, and that's what measuring it the right way can lead to.
Oh, and another way to think of it, Wes, is like, I mentioned this on, I think, Blue Sky, which just occurred to me as the story came out. Like every time somebody in the Northeast Corridor decides to take Amtrak instead of driving between New York and Boston or Philadelphia and DC, our road network gets a little bit safer, right? There's never been, as far as I know, an Acela crash with fatalities. I don't think ever. And Amtrak per mile is way safer than driving in a car. So honestly, if NHTSA really wants to make Americans safer as we travel, it should be out there saying, take a train. Everybody, ride the train. You never hear NHTSA say anything like that, but you should when you take a step back and think about it.
Yeah, and when you give that example, that hypothetical commuter switching from driving to transit, yes, logically we're safer, but if you measure it per mile, we're less safe.
Yeah.
Like the conventional way we measure safety, that example makes us less safe because we've reduced how much driving we're doing. Therefore, we've sort of increased the road fatality rate.
In a weird way, that's true. You're talking about the example from the story I did last week?
Yeah. I mean, even your example right now, like moving to an Acela train, like we're taking miles off the road driven. And when we reduce the miles driven, we're increasing the road fatality rate. So for conventional engineering, from the point of view of the US DOT and the way we measure safety, like putting everybody onto trains, if we keep the same mileage driven, like then yes, that's one thing. But if we're reducing the miles driven, we're actually increasing our road fatality rate.
As the way it's set up now, which just is silly when you take a step back. Like ultimately, you and I, Americans care about whether we die or not. We don't care about whether we die or not per X number of miles. This is what it boils down to me, and why per capita is really the right way of looking at it. Why do you think the per capita? Sorry, why do you think that the distance based stuff sticks around still to this day, even though it's obvious that to me at least, that per capita is a better metric?
Well, I mean, that's one of the things that comes up when you try to tell, a lot of my engineer friends that, oh, hey, look, so-and-so country is much safer than we are. They're like, oh, they drive we drive way more than they do, so it's not really a fair comparison. And that sort of thing happens time and time again. Like, oh, we have way more cars than them. Like, I don't know, it makes... For an engineer, like they're thinking of it from the transportation system's perspective.
Right.
Like that is what they're trying to measure, the safety of the system. Like, we can make a mile driven safer. Great. That should be what we're after. Yeah. But from the perspective of the humans that live in the system, that use that system, from, like you said, you'd much rather live in a place where your individual risk per capita for your kids, for your friends, like you want that to be lower. Like from the average human's perspective, like the way engineers are measuring it makes no sense. But I can see why they're doing it, because it is sort of a transportation system metric. And it's useful for some things, but it's not useful for big picture safety.
Yeah, I could imagine. I have some sympathy for the engineers who might say, look, I can't control land use, so I want to have that be exogenous to the calculation I'm using.
Yeah.
I don't have any sympathy for the car companies, because they are not stupid, and their executives will realize that if we shift toward a per capita safety metric, well, then the obvious way of reducing deaths and making the system safer is by using their products less. And that's true. It's just not helpful for them selling their products.
And I do blame the engineers. It's not just Paul Hoffman's fault and the CEO of Studebaker. Like, he had clearly ulterior motives on this front, but we bought what he was selling. I mean, that's sort of the problem. Like, we took it and ran with it. And we were a new discipline at the time, so we weren't really sure. And he was making some good points in there, but we didn't really think about the bigger picture with this. And we're still doing it today. Like, some of my students are like, oh, wait, we still measure safety this way? I'm like, yes, we do. It's still the most common way to do it. And again, it is useful for some things, but not for really measuring road safety as a health impact.
And that makes sense to me. And for those who are curious for more, that we'll put in the show notes the article I wrote last week. I think, Wes, you may have some materials that make sense too. I'll also add a link We should do it for the International Transport Forum new report, which compares crash death risks across lots of rich countries by both metrics. If you're curious, you can see it by per capita as well as per kilometer driven. And the US is just so far ahead of everybody else in the rich world on a per capita basis. And we're ahead of almost everybody else by per kilometer too, except the gap is not quite as big, which I think might also be part of the reason why engineers like talking about deaths per mile, because it makes them feel like they haven't failed to create a safe system to quite as much of an extent.
Yeah, this is chapter 23 of my book. I just looked it up. It's called The Mirage of More Mileage.
And for those who are thinking, oh, it must be toward the end of the book, it's not. How many chapters do you have, Wes?
88. So yeah. This is towards the beginning of the book.
Yeah, I think it's important that people understand that so that we're not misleading anyone. Your book has a lot of chapters.
Yeah, no, the first 20 to me are the introduction. And so like chapter 21, 2, and 3 are like the beginning of the book. And where I start is just the idiocy of how we just measure safety. Like that, it's, because we all want a more data-driven approach to road safety. But if our data is tricking us into driving more, and we can actually have more fatalities, but if we drive a little bit more, we seem safer. That can't be the road to better safety.
That's just really stupid. Yeah. Yeah. So we need, and as I said in the article last week, like what is measured gets managed. So it actually really does. This is not an esoteric debate. We really need to have the right metrics to guide our safety discussions for how we travel. Let's move on, shall we? To the other roundabout topic, my roundabout topic. Well, I feel like the last one was really both of ours because we both have a lot of thoughts on it. But so I live in Washington, D.C., and I am not proud to say that my mayor, Muriel Bowser, has apparently decided to turn our streets into a racetrack, because it was announced last week that we're going to have an Indianapolis 500 race in DC in August on the National Mall. It'll be about a 2-mile racetrack with views of the Lincoln Memorial and the Capitol and a bunch of other stuff. The vehicles will be going 190 miles per hour. 1 million people are supposed to be traveling to DC in August for this. But I have to share this quote, which literally made me laugh, by a guy named Joseph Newgarden, who is a 2-time Indianapolis 500 winner. I'm sure you knew that, Wes, because you're a big fan of the Indy 500. But he said, and I quote, this big announcement with Sean Duffy, the head of USTU, Department of Transportation, Newgarden said, "I'm so excited to come here to DC during the month of August." And I just want to note, some of you who are listening have probably never been to DC in August. I do not recommend coming here in August. It is like the reputation is this is a city built on a swamp, which is not untrue. Basically, we have way more mosquitoes than people. It's like you're going to turn into a walking puddle crossing the street. And I don't know if like poor Mr. Newgarden saying he's excited to come here in the month of August. I think he's going to get a rude awakening. But putting him aside, this is something that just gets under my craw. The idea of turning city streets into a racetrack. I've actually been to one of these races in another city before. Wes, have you been to one like this?
I know Vegas did it recently. Where else have you seen it?
I actually went to a Formula One race in Zurich, where they basically shut down the city to do a big race in the city of Zurich. And I will say, Zurich, have you been to Zurich?
I have been to Zurich.
It's not the most exciting city. Would you agree with me on that?
From a transit perspective, it's amazing.
Well, okay, fine. The problem with that saying that is like, transportation is like a derived discipline. Like you have to want to go somewhere. I was struggling to find places I wanted to go to in Zurich when I went there there was not a race happening downtown.
So Norman Garrick, my PhD advisor, now lives in Zurich.
Oh, does he? Okay.
Yeah. So he also took multiple sabbaticals there. And during one of those sabbaticals, I think it was maybe 2013, I went to visit him for a week over my spring break, and he gave me a tour of Zurich. We took a bike tour with their bike planner. We took a transit tour. We went out to he's like, oh, you have to see these horrible, horrible suburbs. And we took a train out to nowhere, and it was like some of the most amazing suburbs I've ever seen. I was like, Norman, these are great. Like, what are you talking about?
All right. Well, maybe you saw an exciting side of Zurich. You've ruined my point, which was trying to be that Zurich is a boring city in normal times. So.
I cannot imagine an F1 race on those streets. Like,
yeah. But everybody just left. All the locals were gone. Like, there was nothing happening downtown at all. So yeah, like that's one of the issues is that like unless you really love loud car races, why would you want to be in a city or a part of a city that's hosting a race like this? You're just driving people away, is my view. But then there's a more insidious point, which is like urban streets are not made for speeding. And I do worry about the I don't have any evidence of this, but I do worry about the psychological sort of impact of seeing people, fly through these roads thinking like, oh, maybe I want to try to emulate that when I'm, hanging out with my friends next weekend. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong to worry about that, but it does cross my mind.
Well, I think you could worry about that, but I think you might be wrong in the fact that urban streets are not made for speeding, because I think they are. Like, the scary thing is, like, at least when I was looking at what happened in Vegas, they didn't have to radically redesign or reshape intersections. They didn't have to rebuild the street network. Yeah. They didn't have to redesign road geometry. Like, all they had to do was remove the friction. So the parking, the pedestrians, curbs. And by doing that, they had a racetrack where an F1 car could go 200 miles per hour. Like, that's all they had to do.
Well, that's all right. So that's Vegas. DC is a city with a lot more people walking, biking, and taking transit than Vegas. So I would suspect there's going to be more adjustments, shall we say. And your point is taken. Like, yes, you and I agree that like our streets are designed for speed in a way they shouldn't be. But that's kind of the point, is like they shouldn't be. Like streets shouldn't be designed for speed. And by sort of letting people fly through in a race, you're kind of undercutting the whole idea that we're trying to move toward a paradigm where streets are designed for people to live and walk and enjoy without having to worry about being in a crash. That's what I mean.
Yeah, but they're just temporarily removing the parts that make the street function like a city. So
you think it's cool? You think it's cool? No. You're into it?
No, not at all. But I think it's highlighting the fact that these streets were engineered for speed. Like, underlying the city, like the city is what keeps these streets manageable and usable and somewhat safe. You take away that, all of a sudden the street is a racetrack, and intentionally so. Like, that's what we built.
Even you think that's the case even in like DC, where there's some.
Well, I mean, not every street, but like the arterials. I mean, maybe it's less so in like Boston and places like that, but in Denver, I don't think they'd have to change very much to have a race here.
No, I mean, you and I have talked about this before. It's like there really is a big difference that you can sense in neighborhoods that were designed before the automobile and those afterwards, right? Like,
right.
Denver was largely built after the automobile, and the streets are wide and traffic is allowed to go fast often, and that's where you end up with these problems.
Like, a lot of our downtown in Denver are one-way streets with like 4 lanes of car traffic. Like, that is a racetrack, and it was built that way on purpose. I mean, but you go to DC, like, there were plenty of streets you could not do this on, right? I mean, so they're going to have to.
Well, it's on the mall. I mean, you can't, like, I live on a street that's 1.5 lanes, like a bike lane plus a traffic lane. They're not doing anything there.
They're not doing it on your street, right?
I'm grateful for that. But I do wonder, I haven't seen the route exactly yet. And I guess maybe on like Independence or Constitution, Independence for sure, they could have cars flying through, because God knows that those roads are too wide. And of course, the city of DC can't do anything about those arterials because they're federally controlled. I do wonder, though, if the route is going to require getting onto some local streets that are more narrow and are going to have to be adjusted to accommodate speeding. I don't know. The whole thing is just like an exercise in backwardness to me, just because this is like, if you want to race cars, my attitude is that's fine. Go into a track that's enclosed and doesn't involve people living and working and playing. Like cities are not made for racing. And I think when you try to mix the two, you inevitably end up, I think, sort of muddying some distinctions that should be clear.
So is this better or worse than the UFC fights that are apparently going to be happening in the White House lawn?
Jesus Christ. It's not like you're picking on DC when we're already down, dude. Like, there's so much terrible crap happening in my city right now. Like, you're like kicking me when I'm down. Did you see, like, we have, like, this is the first time I think maybe in history that DC is sort of going through a localized recession where this region has much higher unemployment than the rest of the country, much higher. It's a bigger shift under Trump.
Well, like, given Doge and all that, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, it would make sense that DC would have a lot more unemployment than other parts of the country because there was so many federal jobs that disappeared.
It's the federal jobs. It's also in a big part the contractors. That's a big part of it. So like Northern Virginia and Southern Maryland are hit. And then you have, I think last year was the worst year on record for restaurants in DC because not only were people losing their jobs, people are scared about maybe losing their job in the future. So it's been brutal. I have friends who work in retail or own stores or are managers, and they're feeling the pain. So anyway, thanks for dunking on my city as we're going through it, Wes. Appreciate that.
I do like DC. I mean, but not in August, obviously.
No, then yeah, like, oh my God. My attitude of DC in August is go anywhere else. I remember years ago, I was invited to speak in Montreal in August and I wanted to cry. I was so happy. Like, please, I'll go for free. I'll pay for my flight. Just get me out of here.
I mean, I'm there every year in January, which is also not a great time to be in DC.
I think it's better than August, personally.
I came once in March to speak at a conference. I was like, oh my God, this is so much nicer, like the cherry blossoms. And I took like a White House tour of their gardens, and I could see Michelle Obama like in the distance. Like, it was so much nicer in March than it was in January or August.
It is March right now. The cherry blossom. Actually, it's been such a weird winter. We got a ton of snow. Apparently, we may get flurries tonight, which is bizarre. But it is very nice in March and April. If you want to come visit, please do come. Spend a lot of money. God knows the city could use it, but maybe stay away in August. Both because it's going to be miserable weather-wise, and because there are going to be cars flying through the streets. That I don't know. If you're listening to this podcast, I'd be surprised if you're that excited about it.
Yeah, so we had snow yesterday. We're going to be in the mid-80s like tomorrow.
Well, yeah, Denver's sort of famous for that, isn't it? Your weather is crazy.
Not that bad. Like, this is definitely a weirder winter than most. Like, we've had more days of 70 plus than like Myrtle Beach has this winter.
That makes no sense.
That makes no sense, yeah.
All right, let's drink. We have reached the end of yet another podcast episode.
And it is St. Patrick's Day as well.
It is St. Patrick. Oh, I should have thought of that. I bet I had something Irish. So I have a little bit of context here. So this is what we call Rail Drinks. It's the end of every episode where Wes and I do a toast because we record it at happy hour-ish times. So a little bit of context, Wes. My wife and I went to this sort of like secondhand store in Baltimore that we love called Second Chance, and bought this huge old bar that we've been rehabbing because our booze won't fit in the thing we have now. So we actually moved just yesterday all of our alcohol into this gigantic bar, and I rediscovered all these things I didn't know that I even had. It was really kind of joyous for me. So I have what might be, I don't know. Do you drink a lot of tequila?
No, not so much. I mean, there's been times, but yeah.
There's been times. I bet there has. So I don't. And I just discovered a bottle of Hornitos Black Barrel Tequila Añejo, which might be pretty good. I'm holding it up for those who are watching. Do you know this kind?
What did you say it was called?
Hornitos Black Barrel.
It looks like a nice bottle if you want to judge a book by its cover.
Yeah, it does, like good marketing, if nothing else. And I haven't had tequila in a long time, so I don't have the salt and lime, but I thought I would indulge because I didn't even know that I had this until 24 hours ago. How about you? What do you got?
That is nice when you find something like in the back of like a cabinet. You're like, oh, look at this. So it is St. Patrick's Day, and I know I did have a Guinness, like that was one of the podcasts. You were off in Europe, so we taped it at 10 a.m. So it was a Guinness 0.0. Like, this one here is a real Guinness. I have a real Guinness for St. Patrick's Day. I've already put it in a mug because Guinness takes a little bit of time. So
that's beautiful.
It is delicious.
All right. Well, cheers. Happy St. Patrick's Day.
And cheers.
Ooh, that's smooth. This is good tequila. At least I think it is. Wow. Remarkable. Anyway,
as long as you like it, man.
I'll take it. But it has a kick, so now I'm going to be coughing my way through the through the ending. But we are going to be back in exactly 2 weeks' time. If you want to join us on the live stream, It will be on March 31st, Tuesday at 6 p.m. If you enjoyed the podcast, tell a friend maybe, or you can always subscribe and you'll know about when the next ones are coming out. You can find us on any major podcast app, or you can also just watch us on YouTube. And you can reach us with your questions, thoughts, comments, complaints at lookbothwayspod@gmail.com. Wow, tequila really does sort of like come back and bite you. Anything else I forgot, Wes? Did I cover the bases?
No, you got it.
All right. Well, good to see you. And until the 31st, we'll see you then.